Hi creatives! Today I am answering all of your burning questions about working as an illustrator. And new or super experienced, I hope that all of you will find something that makes your illustration process a little bit more enjoyable. You have also asked if I can share more of the behind the scenes with my drawing process, so I thought that while I answer these questions, I'll also add a time lapse of me drawing an illustration for a web banner. The very first question is, do you need an illustration style? And how do you actually find or create your illustration style? I think this is largely down to the type of project that you want to work on. So me, for example, I work mostly as a brand designer, which means that it's actually a strength to be able to adapt the illustration style to each brand's unique vision and unique style. But if you want to primarily get hired for illustration, let's say children's books or editorial illustration, in that case, having a style can make it a lot easier for an agent to represent you, for someone to hire you for a specific style, and that can be a benefit of having a specific style. I definitely have a style, and it's very inspired by children's books and kind of whimsical, magical things that just make me happy. So whenever I'm creating for passion projects or products that I'm selling digitally, I like to use my own illustration style, but sometimes it can also influence the way that I work with clients if I think it will be a good overlap. I think a lot of illustrators that especially are new are really nervous about getting kind of stuck in a style and feeling like it's creatively limiting. But what I have found is that it's actually super comforting to get comfortable in a style, and then you can infinitely improve it. So even though I'm kind of using the same style that I did a year ago, it has evolved tons, and I have become a much better illustrator just by evolving that one style. So the quick answer is no, you don't need a style, but it can help you be known for something and it can be easier to get work. When it comes to finding your style, it's all down to experimenting and trying things that you are really excited about. I started drawing when I was like 6 or 7, and I would sit in my bedroom with like a cassette tape story on and I would draw all night. And the first thing I was doing a lot was to focus on things that were realistic and kind of like step-by-step drawing books. So I would draw how to draw a horse, how to draw a dog, how to draw a face. And that copying really helped me to be able to understand the anatomy of things, perspectives, and really understand kind of how things are constructed. And that was a really good basis for me. Once you've been creating a lot, you will start to find artists that you are really inspired by and that you really admire. And at that point, I think it's really good to start breaking down why you really love their artwork. Is it because they're really amazing at lighting or composition? Is it the interaction between the characters? Or is it that it's super cute or super futuristic? So try to break down what it is that you love about other people's work, and then look at your own work and see how you can start to experiment and incorporate those different things with different styles. Slowly, you will start to have preferences like, oh, I like to draw eyes like this, or I really like to draw cats, for example. And that will be a really nice way for you to start incorporating those things into your illustration, and that will slowly evolve to become your style. So creating your own illustration style is, I think, a mix of consciously trying to expose yourself and try different styles, but also slowly starting to do things in the same way, maybe using the same color palette or using the same structures in your illustration. And I think this leads us nicely into the next question, which is, how do you stay motivated when you are developing your style and growing as an illustrator? It used to be that when I was drawing, I felt like if the end result wasn't something that I loved, it was a waste of time. And that was a really destructive way to think about it, because it was super frustrating, because when you're drawing in the beginning, and especially trying new styles, it's not going to be amazing. It's not going to be as good as it is in your head. Now I instead try to think about just the fact that I'm drawing. It's more about that I'm drawing than exactly what I'm drawing or the end result. And I think this is where each part of it is just seen as a learning experience. Every bad drawing is just a stepping stone to your next masterpiece. So this is where I think passion projects really are important, and doing things that aren't on the clock per se. So whenever we're creating for clients, I actually used to sit around and wait for clients to hire me for the type of illustrations that I wanted to do, which is really, really difficult, because then you're trying to deliver that style and deliver those things on a timeline and on a specific client budget. And this is really difficult because you're constantly thinking about what is this client going to think about this illustration. So instead, try to create all of those illustrations that you love and that you want to get hired for in your free time or in the time that you have to develop your own business. Another really important aspect of feeling good about our work is how we interact with other artists' work. So if, let's say, you go onto social media and you see amazing artists' work, if we instantly feel bad about our own work or frustrated that we're not already there, that will be a really negative experience. But instead, if we try to see it as inspiration and a learning experience, and we take and break down those illustrations and say, oh, I really love how they used lighting in this illustration. They used the light source that came from the top, and then look how they interacted with all these other elements. How can I experiment with that in my own drawing? That will actually make you a better illustrator, and it will feel more active and less defeating. If you have a goal to become an illustrator or a better illustrator, try to set goals that you can actually control. So rather than saying, okay, I want to get this many projects or this many followers on social media, say, I'm gonna draw 30 minutes every day. And try to be nice to yourself about it and really do it as something that is important to you rather than something that is an external focus. So the next question is, what happens after a client hires you? What are the different steps that you go through? And you know, I really like a good process, so I'm excited about this one. Okay, so when the client has hired me, they sign the agreement, they pay the deposit, the first thing I want to do is to develop and define their illustration style. So if we're working on a branding project, we're going to focus on their key demographics, we're going to focus on their competitors, and we're going to develop a style that fits in with their overall brand. If I'm working on a project that is a standalone illustration, let's say we're just doing illustrations for a children's book, we're doing an editorial illustration that fits in with the magazine brand, for example, then I want to have a look at a mood board and creating a joint visual language with my clients so we're on the same page. This can be as simple as you creating a joint Pinterest board with them, or they might have really specific details, or you might even create curated mood boards together. Once we have this basic style visual language idea that we have together, then I'd ask for content. So this could be the text that's going to go along with the illustration, like in a brochure, for example, or a children's book. Or I might also ask for the kind of description of what they're looking for. So this might be, okay, we're presenting a medical device and we wanted to convey this part of the technology, for example. So sometimes you have a very prescriptive brief and sometimes it's more open, like create something that is really inspiring and futuristic, for example. I also make sure that I get any specifications like the size of the artwork. Is it RGB for digital use or is it CMYK for print? Do they have die lines if it's packaging, for example? Just to make sure that I'm setting up my artwork exactly like it should be. Next up, I create rough sketches. And this is just to get an idea of what the artwork will be, what the subjects will be, and the general layout. Because I want to get my client's opinion and feedback before I start doing the whole detailed final artwork. Because it's so much easier to edit a sketch than it is to edit a final art piece. Once the sketches are approved, I go in and I create the final illustration, and then we go back and forth and see if there are iterations, maybe color changes, or other edits that need to happen before they start using the artwork. And this is where it's really important to make sure you set up your artwork so it's easy to edit. Use layers and use different clipping masks to make sure that it's easy to change the opacity of things, remove a layer without having to destroy the rest of your illustration. The next question is what tools I use to create my illustrations. And I use Procreate on my iPad and I also use Adobe Illustrator on my computer. The reason I do it this way is because I grew up drawing with pen and paper, so I'm really comfortable with that methodology. But then I started designing and I jumped into Adobe Illustrator and I got comfortable with the pen tool. Now the thing is, Procreate to me feels a lot more natural and it helps me use a lot more brushes and techniques that feel like illustrating did on paper for me. So I prefer it from a user perspective for me. But Adobe Illustrator uses vectors, which means that you can scale your artwork to any size. While in Procreate, it works the same as it does in Photoshop, meaning it's pixels. So if you're scaling it to a different size, it will actually pixelate and not look high quality. So therefore, I use a mix depending on what the use case is. When I create in Adobe Illustrator, just because I'm more comfortable with Procreate, I usually create the basic sketch in Procreate and then import the artwork and use the pen tool to recreate that design. This is a super fun question, and the question is, what's the difference between creating for print and for digital use? There are a lot of things to think about, and I think the most obvious one is the color profile. So when we work with print, we want to use CMYK, and for digital use, we use RGB. And those are just different color profiles that offer different things. And typically CMYK is a little bit more dull. There's not as many options that we have for the print there. So certain tones, like doing, for example, lilac or light blues or really vibrant blues, tends to be a little bit more difficult in CMYK. You can also look at Pantone for printing, but that's a whole nother topic by itself. Besides colors, there's also a couple other things you need to think about. So for print, we typically have one specification, like this artwork is going to be on this packaging, or it's going to be in this brochure, and it will be printed at one size and in one context. I find that with illustrations for digital use, not only do we have to think about how is it going to look on desktop, how is it going to look for mobile, but we also need to think about, okay, will they repurpose this for a social media post or for this and that purpose? And so therefore, it's really important to think about how your illustrations will be laid out and functionally work when they're used in different digital situations. For example, the illustration that I'm creating here is for a web banner. And if I was just thinking about the desktop, I might have created a really wide, full width, horizontal piece of artwork. The problem is when it goes on mobile, that would have been tiny. So therefore I created it as a square without a background, and that way it can be added to the right-hand side, for example, of a web banner with a background that's in the code. And then when it's on mobile, it will stack to be above or below the text and work really well and work at a really nice size. So think about how the different applications work in digital and how you can adapt your illustrations and make them really versatile for your clients. This next one is really common, and that is, how do you come up with ideas for your illustrations? Sometimes, like I said, the brief is more prescriptive, but when I don't have a specific direction that the client already wants, I try to start with the feeling that I want to create. So for example, for the piece that we're doing here, I know it's going to be for creatives, so people like you, and I want it to be about time freedom because the app that we're designing it for is going to help you be able to spend less time on admin and emails and more time on creating and having a nice time at work. So I wanted a sense of freedom and creativity and a little bit of like a magical hint so that it would feel really fun. Once I have this feeling established that I want to use, I go and look for inspiration for all of the different components. So I might look at inspiration for florals, inspiration for characters in different situations, different kind of relaxing poses. And I might look for color palettes that create that energetic or relaxing vibe that I want, for example. And then I collect all of that into a mood board and I use that to base my illustrations on. Not as copying, that's really important. Things that are on Pinterest are still copyrighted work, just as a reference for the way that I can construct my artwork. Next up, I try to write down a ton of different ideas. So some of the ideas I had for this one was maybe someone sitting at a really nice cafe, and then something like climbing up a ladder. I had lots of different ideas, and some of them are going to be terrible. And at this stage, you just need to see which different ideas can I create that would evoke this feeling, and then you need to vet them for, will it fit in the format that I'm creating? Will it be too detailed? Will it need more detail? And then you'll see which ideas stand out as a simple concept but still has that feeling that you want to create. Typically you want to have one focal point so that the illustration will be really clear. And in this case, I wanted the character to be the main focus, but I still want all of these elements around it to be important. So I usually start with the main character and then I draw around that to create the scene and the setting that they're in. The next question is, how can I get better at drawing? My first tip here is to try to remove as much pressure as possible, both internal pressure of having to do something amazing, but also timelines and client work. So if you're working on something you're not feeling completely comfortable on, try to do it as a passion project rather than client work if you can. Another good tip is to really look for illustration classes like on Skillshare and YouTube, for example, are places I like to go, and just take lots of classes where you're just creating for the sake of creating. Maybe you're doing challenges of drawing all the letters of the alphabet in one style, or maybe I'm doing a really great one right now about doing backgrounds and scenery. And this is a really nice way to explore areas that might be weaknesses of yours, but also just to really have fun with creating, because ultimately when you have fun illustrating and you practice a lot, that's how you get really good. My next tip is to get better at analyzing your work in a productive way. So I say try to not analyze the work that you're doing right after you're done. Just create, have fun, and create a lot. But then, when you maybe have taken a few weeks, go back and look at everything that you've illustrated and see, oh, I'm really good at faces, for example, but hands are super tricky. I really need to practice on hands. But try to do it in a way that you're not being negative to yourself, but just seeing what am I good at, what am I not good at yet. And then that way you're having a bit more distance, because what you create right in the moment, that's not a good time to judge for yourself. I think that's quite a difficult time. The very last question is, how do I pick colors for my illustrations? There are so many good strategies here, and it kind of depends on the type of artwork that you're creating. I usually start with looking at the mood board that I've created together with my client and seeing if there are any trends or color palettes that can help me convey that specific feeling. For example, if I'm creating a piece about anxiety and feeling really bad, I might be using a lot of cold colors like blues and light shades to give that sense of not feeling comfortable. While if I'm creating something about hiking or camping, I might use colors that remind me of maybe the woods, like reds and browns and like mossy greens, for example. So have a think about the purpose of the illustration first and look back at the mood board. Once you have the general direction, I think we can really think about the saturation and the tone of our colors as a way to use them as tools. So if you have, let's say, lots of colors that are super saturated, they will all create a really vibrant impact. But if, let's say, you have really pale colors and one really saturated color, that will become the focus of your illustration. So you can use shades and different hues in that way to bring out different things in your illustration that you want to highlight. I personally have a color palette that I use a lot that is based on really warm, kind of natural tones. And I have made sure that all of them are kind of equally vibrant because I want a really soft, harmonious palette. But again, that's something that is super personal. So I think you have to test it out. And also, if you're working with a brand that has their own brand guide, you might want to start with their brand guide and then use that as a guide to create the color palette. Sometimes when you have a brand that has very limited colors, you might want to take those and then expand them into different shades of the same color, or suggest adding a few more shades just to make the illustration more dynamic. I could definitely talk about colors forever, so if you want a video specifically where I show you how to create different color palettes, let me know down in the comments and I'll make sure to get that done as well. I really hope you enjoyed seeing me illustrate, and I hope that these questions and answers helped you start becoming a little bit more comfortable and excited about illustrating. Thank you so much for watching. Good luck with your projects and see you next time.